Guys, today we talk about a movie that, in my opinion, is more Indiana Jones than the last two Indiana Jones films. It's The Rundown with The Rock next on Drew Reviews. So, guys, I've been waiting to talk about this movie since I started the channel last November. I'm a big fan of The Rundown. I'm going to get into the plot real quick so we can just talk about the good things. And there really aren't too many bad things to talk about in this movie. So, here goes. In the opening scene, we established the character of Beck, played by The Rock, and this was like his second, feature movie after The Scorpion King. And I love the opening scene when he goes into this club to go get this championship ring from this football player. And as he's walking in, I don't know how many people notice, but he passes Arnold Schwarzenegger. And Schwarzenegger tells him, have fun. And it was kind of like a passing of the mantle from one action star to another because Arnold was running for office at the time. But I thought that was pretty cool because The Rock kind of has been the big action star since then. I don't know who else you would have an argument. Maybe Mark Wahlberg, who's just super vanilla to me. The world's gone the way of the superhero movies, which I'm not a huge fan of because they've taken the place of the traditional action movie like this, and that's a different rant for a different time. We'll get back to the plot. He goes in and he gets this championship ring from this guy and takes out the entire offensive line. We really establish the character. I love that line where he's like calling his boss. He's like, "You really want me to do this? They've got a legitimate shot at competing this year." It's just some great dialogue. But he takes the ring back to his employer and he's like, "I want out because The Rock is the chef." And I'm guessing they made him a chef due to his catchphrase, "Do you smell what The Rock is cooking?" That's it's a really odd choice for a character like Beck. So I'm imagining that's what it is. But he's like, Billy's got one more job for him to do, and he needs to go catch this character of Travis Walker, who's actually his son, down in the Amazon, and bring him back. And that's the basic premise of The Rundown. He's just going to get Sean William Scott's character Travis and bring him back. But it sounds easy enough, but he has so much trouble. He gets in this little town of El Dorado, which there's a sign, it's great, that says Hell Dorado. Originally, that's what this movie was called, and I think I prefer that more than The Rundown, but you've got The Rock, and, he's got all this rock lingo, so I guess that fits. But he goes into this mining town, and it's ran by Christopher Walken, and he owns everything in the town. He's paying his workers like 65 cents an hour to go down in this hole and, bring back gold. So he asks permission to bring him back. He goes into this bar to get him. And of course, there's this great fight there. And Christopher Walken's like, "No, you can't have him. He's going after an artifact that I really want." So The Rock makes this great escape, Travis. They go into the jungle. And along the way, they fight freedom fighters and monkeys and Hatcher's goons. And they're trying to find this Gato. It's the artifact that Travis is looking for. And it's going to bring all these riches to the land, if they can get it. Of course, he wants it kind of for personal glory. But he's the only one who knows where it's at. So Hatcher's goons are after him. The Rock's with him, just trying to get him to get this Gato for them so he can take him back and get out and get his restaurant. There's a really cool plot point where Rosario Dawson's character, she's the bartender, but she's actually the leader of the freedom fighter resistance, and so she's with them too. And so there's this really cool dynamic between the three characters in this movie. But anyway, they get the Gato. She ends up sedating them with these poisonous conlabos, and she takes the Gato, ends up getting kidnapped by Hatcher. At the end of the movie, they have this great moral dilemma. Beck has Travis, and he can take him back at any time, but he's also promised this girl that he would deliver the Gato to her and her people. So yeah, they have this great final fight in the town there at the end. And that's basically the plot of The Rundown. I really enjoy the principal actors in this movie. The Rock is pretty good. He reminds me almost of Schwarzenegger, in some of his with the one-liners. Sean William Scott in this thing. Yeah, normally I'm not a big fan of his. I like him in Evolution, caca caca, and I like him a little bit in Bulletproof Monk, but I'm not really a fan of the raunchy comedies style, and so like the American Pie movies I don't like, but this is him at his most tolerable for me, and I like his character. What's this? It's Mr. Thunder and his friend Mr. Lightning. That's really good. I like the scene right before they get caught in the pig snares, where he has to pee, and he tells the Rock, he's like, "Come on, man, unzip me. I can't go in my pants." And he's like, "Oh man, don't make it weird." And kind of gives him the people's eyebrow. Just his facial expressions are really good in this. But yeah, he's pretty tolerable. Rosario Dawson's great. Christopher Walken in this movie, I love him in this as Hatcher, the tyrant. He has some great lines. Do you understand the concept of the tooth fairy? They got my freaking tooth. I want it back. And there's a scene wherever the Jeep goes over the cliff, with Beck and Travis in it. And that's a really good scene, how they keep rolling down this hill and they fall in the water and the Jeep comes down almost on top of them. But Hatcher and his goons come up on the aftermath of that scene, and his number two is like, "Do you think they survived?" And he's like, "What am I, a psychic?" Which is a callback to the Dead Zone, and I really appreciated that. There's that scene there in that bar where Beck has Travis. He's got him cuffed behind his head, and he's leading him out. Hatcher's like, I can't let you have him, Mr. Beck. And he's like, "But we had a deal. I paid you 10 grand. And he's like, "Fortunately, I had my fingers crossed the entire time." And I consider it tax deductible. Walken has some great lines in this, and I really love him in this movie. I wish he was in it more. But I love it because this is Christopher Walken as Christopher Walkenist, if that's a word. He is emphasizing words, but they're the wrong words to be emphasizing. Normal people wouldn't speak like that, so it gives him an interesting cadence. And yes, he does that in a lot of movies, but it's really profound in this one. Just the way he speaks, kind of like Scatman Carruthers when he's in a movie. He's got this rap to him. Christopher Walken's rap's kind of like an abstract Picasso of dialogue. It's great. I really like the character of Declan, the bush pilot that flies Beck into the town of El Dorado. I, I think he's supposed to be a Scotsman, because he plays the bagpipes. Originally, I thought he sounded Irish, but I'm not from that part of the world, so I don't know. But as they're getting ready to land the plane, he's like, we got booze on the ground." So we got bullets on the grind. What? That's a really good scene. He reminds me of the gyro pilot a little bit in Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, which I think I'm going to review that here fairly soon because that's just a seminal action movie. But he reminds me a lot of him. That scene, that scene where he's like, "I don't give a flying fornication." Uh, I've actually I've actually used that line in real life. So uh, yeah, I just like that Declan character. The scene with the Conlabos in this is really good. After they found the gato, they're having this little celebration around a campfire, and she's like cutting this fruit for him, and so they start eating it and start hallucinating, and like the Rock's ears fluttering and their faces distort. It's really funny. The monkey scene where they get caught in the snares and the monkeys jump on them and start humping them. That's funny, to like a 14-year-old boy or like a 40-year-old man. It's just I really enjoyed that. And so yeah, that when they get those Conlabos, they're at the end, and so they're paralyzed for the night. The monkeys show up, and they're pretty much helpless there. That's a really funny scene. And I wanted to talk about one more actor in the movie. One of the leaders of the Freedom Fighters there is Ernie Reyes Jr. He was Keno in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze. I know him more growing up from Red Sonja. He was the little prince, that had the big lug with him and did martial arts. But I really liked him in this movie. And I actually saw this in the theaters back in 2003, 20 years ago, with my good friend Chris. And so when he came out, I didn't realize who he was at first. And then when I watched it after the DVD, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's Ernie Reyes Jr." But yeah, they beat the crap out of The Rock in that scene. And I love it. What's up, Kansas Cities? That scene's great. So I'm not a filmmaker, but I do believe they probably put a filter over this movie because the greens and the browns in this movie really pop when you sit back and watch it. It's very striking, the rainforest and the dirt and everything. And I'm almost wondering if they didn't put an amber filter over this movie. So yeah, they did something to this movie in post, to the negative, because the images in this movie are really striking. But before I wrap this thing up, I wanted to talk about one more scene in this movie that's really good, and that is the final fight. Beck's giving people options all through the movie. You can take option E, which is the easy way, and you give up, or you take option B, and I make you. And so he gives this ultimatum to Hatcher to give him the Gato back, and Hatcher just laughs in his face with all of his goons because he's got a small army of like 100 people. And The Rock doesn't use guns. As a matter, we'll get to that in a minute. So this scene starts with there's a stampede of all these cattle coming through town, and then Declan comes through with bagpipes and he's blowing on them and he's quoting the Bible and Hatcher in his really thick Scottish accent, which makes it even funnier. And of course, here's The Rock with no guns, and he's beating up these guys, him and Sean William Scott, and they make their way through, and they finally get to this point where they get stuck and they're pinned down. And I like that scene. You know, there's images of shells in slow mo being ejected from guns and guns smoking, and finally it's like, okay, I have to use some guns here. The Rock picks up this gun, and I love the Rock soundtrack behind him when he finally gets up and starts shooting guys and taking guys out. Because we've been told all movie that I don't use guns because bad things happen. And bad things do end up happening. He ends up clearing the town, and Hatcher ends up leaving. You know, he's shot in the stomach and ends up dying there, you know, on the way out. And but that pretty much wraps up the rundown, you know, other than that last scene where The Rock takes Travis back to his dad, but he feeds them the Conlabos and then gives him his freedom after the fact, which is pretty satisfying ending. You get a little more lightning and thunder in there. Overall, this movie to me is a great watch. It is one of my favorite action movies of the 2000s. Actually, if I was to do a top 10 of my favorite movies of 2000 to 2009, The Rundown would be in it. And I'm really torn about what I want to rate it because I think it's an 8. But, you know, the critic in me wants to go high sevens. I think I'm going to go ahead and give it an 8. And, you know, people out there can laugh at me if they want to that, wow, you gave that an 8. It's a fun movie. It's one of the funnest action movies, like I said, from that decade. And if you've not seen it, give it another watch because there's great performances there by everybody. Like I said, the art direction, you know, with the amber lighting on the negative is really good. And Christopher Walken just gives a great performance as Hatcher. So, guys, stay tuned to Drew Reviews. I've got a few things coming up. I've got a Denzel Washington movie, I believe, next week. And then I might do a topic after that. We'll see what happens. Until then, guys, be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, I've been Andrew, and I'll see you down the line.